wide-eyed innocent who eagerly asked, "Where's the gold?" To which the wise and tired veteran replied, "It's where you find it."
The point to go to before anything else is Sacramento to Sutter's Fort.
At Sutter's Fort, miners gathered to purchase supplies and swap stories.
Sutter was a very gregarious, friendly person to these people, in spite of the fact that he saw his whole empire crumbling around him. Sutter's Fort was dismantled in a period of a few months by people who were just taking it as building materials. And Sutter, he in frustration fled.
Sutter spent the rest of his life futilely seeking compensation for his losses from Congress. He died in 1880, a frustrated and disappointed man.
The way gold mining would occur, you could only do it 2 or 3 times a year for a short period of time. Either it was too dry, there wasn't enough water to mine with, it was too wet, too much water to mine with, it was too cold, it was snowing. I mean, there were all these little things that were making it miserable.
Undaunted, thousands of miners eager to strike it rich made their way to the gold diggings north and east of Sacramento.
The real hardships didn't come in crossing the country because they're young and strong men. The real hardships came when they had to get in the gold fields.
I tell you, this mining among the mountains is a dog's life. A man has to make a jackass of himself packing loads over mountains that God never designed a man to climb, and a heathen by foregoing all the comforts of civilized life. William Swain, January 1850.
Eventually, the miners reached the riverbanks of gold country.
The miners themselves established the rules of the game. They established how large the claims could be. They determined what the time span could be that you could work a claim or abandon it. Each mining camp was a district, gradually evolved its own rules of behavior.
Working in small groups or companies, the gold seekers began placer mining.
Placer gold is gold that is deposited in sand or gravel or alluvium. It's been washed out of the granite core of the Sierra Nevada over millennia. It's poor man's gold. Anybody then can separate the gold from soil or sand or gravel.
Early miners used everything from pans and cradles to devices called long toms to wash and separate the gold from the earth around it.
These miners realized very soon that that gold had to come from someplace, and it had to be more plentiful where it came from than sitting in these sands. So they always were looking for the mother lode.
The search for the mother lode led to the development of hard rock mining.
Hard rock mining is when you're digging into the earth and looking for those deposits of gold buried in the matrix of the quartz.
While some dug into the earth, others washed it away by hydraulic mining.
This was, in a sense, the ultimate form of placer mining. Entire hillsides were washed away with a powerful stream of water. And unfortunately, we're living with that destruction of the topsoil in the watershed to this day.
The mother lode, that great mythic single source of all the gold, was never found.
Remember something about gold and the quest for gold. All the hard work in the world meant nothing in the gold field at the start. It's pure luck. Anybody can be lucky.
And anybody and everybody, it seemed, was coming to California to try their luck in the gold fields.
In '48, there had been very few men in the gold country. By the end of the season, there had probably been only 10,000. By the end of '49, this number had probably quadrupled.
With that many people from such diverse backgrounds coming into California so quickly, conflict and change were inevitable.
The first people to suffer, and suffer dramatically, were the Native Americans who lived in California.
These Indians were terribly vulnerable, and any effort on their part to protect their space simply resulted in disaster. They were brutally murdered in many instances.
Oriental miners suffered particular hardships at the hands of their Anglo compatriots. And they weren't allowed to testify in court against Anglos, and so it became very easy to defraud them.
The Chinese were not allowed to own property. They were contract laborers, incidentally, not under contract to white people, but under contract to Chinese who managed them.
So we begin to put in the way of these foreigners some obstacles, the foreign miners' tax, anything that can be brought to bear to prevent them from achieving the success that if they succeed, that could have been my gold.
Regardless of who they were or where they came from, no gold seeker was exempt from the hardships of mining life.
If you just imagine standing from daylight to sunset in the water that runs out of the Sierras, which is so cold, these people were miserable. They got numb in that water.
We don't begin to realize the sorrow, the pain, the physical challenge, the Herculean demand to get down to where the gold is.
People at home have no conception of the amount of suffering in this vicinity. Fevers are aggravated by overwork, scanty and bad food, disappointment, and homesickness. Dr. J.B.D. Stillman, December 1849.
For all their labors and all that they endured, most miners failed to strike it rich.
The great strikes were still being made, but not in the great numbers that they had been in 48. And many of the men in 49 barely scratched a living.
All these harsh realities clashed sharply with the naive expectations many brought with them to California.
One of the most charming accounts of how expectations were at war with reality was a group of Frenchmen who came, and they had thought that because the gold was in the rivers, they brought these huge rakes. They didn't want to get wet. And so this French company came with these huge rakes, and some of them even brought their wives, which I love because they brought their wives and little embroidered stools for them to sit on and little silver tongs so they could amuse themselves picking up the nuggets while their husbands raked the rivers.
It very quickly became apparent that the way to make money in the diggings wasn't digging. The way to make money was off the miners. And those who went into the mercantile business, those who went into the supply business, those were the people who made the money.
Money was the least valuable commodity in California in those days because anybody could dig it out of the ground. But if you wanted a cantaloupe, it was another matter.
The merchant, when told that men find from $16 to $100 a day, very readily concludes they can easily pay $1 for a pound of potatoes, or $2 for a pound of dried apples. As in New York, they can pay half a cent for the former, or 4 cents for the latter. William Swain, February 1850.
If there was one man who embodied the grim realities and great expectations of the miners, it was James Marshall, the man whose discovery of gold started the rush.
People would pay him to find gold. Well, he couldn't find gold any better than the next guy. And then people got very angry with him when he didn't find gold, and so he ended up in a cabin someplace, dying all by himself.
It is not known exactly how much gold was mined during the gold rush. Some estimates have put its value as high as $1 billion. However, what is known is that the California miners, those anonymous men who overcame physical and psychological hardships to contribute to this great wealth, became truly distinctive figures of the American West.
It's the most optimistic group of Americans imaginable. They had to be, or they wouldn't have set out on this great trek and this great adventure in the first place.
You may think that I am sick of my job, but not so. I have not seen the hour yet when I regretted starting for California. I have seen hard times, faced the dangers of disease and exposure, and perils of all kinds. But I count them nothing if they enable me to place myself and my family in comfortable circumstances. William Swain, January 1850.
That kind of energy, that kind of optimism, that kind of confidence has become a part of the hormonal strength of California.
The miners' energy and optimism would be harnessed to build a society every bit as colorful and unique as the gold they mined.
It was the first internationally known serial killer with the sensational name Jack the Ripper.
Jack the Ripper on Mystery Quest. All new